Now we kick off this hour with our big interview with Jeremy Hunt, and he's defended that controversial decision to give £1 million towards the cost of building a memorial specifically to honour the Muslims who died in the First and Second World Wars. Well, I'm now joined in the studio by our political editor Chris Hope, and also I've got the pleasure of having our economics and business editor Liam Halligan. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Big guns.
It is. Yeah, I'm caught between two big guns here. Better not be on top of my brief. Let's start with you, Chris. When that announcement came out, the opening bold of the test, the opening sentence yesterday, £1 million to that war memorial, a lot of people gasped, and the emails that we got yesterday certainly reflected that. A lot of people not happy. Has the Chancellor of the Exchequer got tin ears?
It was surprising, wasn't it? That was the first thing he announced, £1 million for this Muslim war memorial, and he framed it, didn't he, in the context of the fighting in Gaza post the October 7th attacks. I asked him about that in this interview he's done with GB News at this lunchtime, and he framed it by saying, well, I did give £7 million to Holocaust Education Trust back in the autumn statement, but that wasn't said, so it came out of nowhere. Here's what he had to say.
I think it is important to recognise the contribution of 170,000 Muslims who died defending our freedoms. We have already, as a government, supported a memorial to Sikh soldiers who died. We supported a memorial to black and African soldiers who died in Windrush Square in Brixton, and a very good proposal. I also, by the way, remembered the sufferings and worries of people of the Jewish faith in my autumn statement. So a very good proposal was made to me by Sajid Javid,
yes,
who is a colleague and a friend, and I decided that had merit.
I asked him in that interview also whether he thought this memorial would be divisive, and he said no, he's very clear. We know we had feedback from GB News viewers and listeners who were concerned about it. They thought, how is this happening? Why is this happening? Is it trying to, we got these protests around war memorials
why now?
Palestinians. I know, and that is the problem, is he's politicised something which shouldn't be very political, basically. And that's the problem, what's happened here. We also talked to him about, I was so fascinated, I'm sure Liam was too, that he mentioned controlling migration 3 times in his budget speech, and yet the OBR there makes very clear they expect net migration to go up by 30%, and that's baked in now into the OBR forecast, and more than the OBR shortly with Liam, I'm sure. I asked him why that was, whether he's relying for economic growth on migration. He's trying to disavow at the same time. Here's what he had to say.
We have had a big increase in migration in recent years because of Ukraine, because of Afghanistan, because of Hong Kong. Very specific factors, where as a country we did the right thing, but the current levels of migration are not sustainable. This government wants to bring it down. It's currently, as you know, over 700,000, far too high. The government's brought in some very clear policies to bring those numbers down. The OBR make an estimate of where that will get to based on what the Office for National Statistics say. It's a small increase on the numbers the ONS previously said. What I'm saying is we've got to change that. We need to change our model so that we are not relying on companies being able to expand by hiring more and more workers from overseas, because we've got 10 million adults of working age in this country who are not in work.
Okay, let's bring in Liam Halligan now. Liam, it struck me as staggering 3 times in the budget yesterday. Jeremy Hunt specifically weaponised the fact that the Labour Party would be reliant upon migrant labour, and yet he kicked off by referencing the OBR stats, which have upgraded their own figures to show that actually we are reliant on migrant labour, and that hasn't really been factored into the budget. Who's in control?
Well, we'll come on to who's in control in a moment, because there is something to discuss about, the OBR, the Bank of England, unelected people really pulling the economic levers now, instead of elected politicians that are accountable to the electorate, which is how our system should work. But on migration, look, I've been knocking around the economics profession, such as it is, for about 30 years. And the economic orthodoxy has always been, certainly in this country, that migration is economically good.
Yeah.
Migration means you have more young people. Migration means that the financial, the fiscal accounts are improved because we're an ageing society. We've got more workers to pay taxes, to pay for people's pensions. Migrants are dynamic. I have always embraced that orthodoxy, being of migrant stock myself. My people have been coming over here from the west of Ireland for centuries, and we've done pretty well for ourselves and by the country, I would say. But when you look not just at GDP, not just at the size of the economy, when you look at GDP per head, crucially, and when you consider that public services are now so stretched that a big influx of people, net migration in 2022 was 725,000. That's equivalent to the city of Leeds, which is our 6th biggest city, right? In 1 year, that's net.
Yes.
That's net. When you have public services so stretched, when you have businesses used to just employing more people relatively cheaply rather than investing in plant and technology and capital, we have a productivity problem precisely because we've just chucked more people at problems rather than being smart and investing in new products and all the rest of it. You now have a situation where the economic establishment is starting to acknowledge, Martin, that ever more migration might not always and everywhere be a good thing for the economy. And there was a very, very important interview in the Telegraph, a paper that Christopher and I know very well, with a very bright man who I've got a lot of respect for, I've known for many years, called David Miles. And he's the chief economist of the Office for Budget Responsibility. He's not just a card-carrying economist. He's also very politically, small p, politically astute. I'm not accusing him of any party allegiance at all. And he gave an interview where he acknowledged that more migration might actually sometimes be bad for GDP per head, might be bad for the experience of people here, whether of migrant stock or not, as they try and access public services. That is a sea change. That is now starting to shift. You're right. It has been the orthodoxy for years that the Treasury always wants more immigration, more immigration, more immigration. It might not always be good for the economy. I think on balance it generally is. But when you reach a real inflection point where public services are stretched, the economy has stagnated and population has gone up very, very quickly, GDP per head and experience of public services fall.
But also, just before we come to getting away from that pure GDP thing, people certainly notice that difference in doctor's appointments, dentistry, and all the rest of it, and that strain, Chris.
But Liam, when he says it there 3 times, we can't rely on mass migration to fuel economic growth, and then his own OBR forecast increased the forecast number of net arrivals by 1/3.
Okay.
What's that about?
But we've got to be very, very careful here. And I thought there was confusion in some of the morning interviews as well, not on GB News, but on rival news channels, which I won't embarrass them by mentioning. Look, so we went to 725,000 net in 2022. The new number in 2023, when it comes out, will be much lower. Why? Because we haven't got the influx of people from Hong Kong, who almost everyone in the UK would say, yes, of course, these Hong Kong Chinese people must absolutely come here. They are British people. They are fantastically dynamic people. We owe them. Or very little opposition, very little fuss, a lot of pride, actually, that we had lots of people come from Ukraine. I housed 4 Ukrainians myself with my family in my house. There was a wellspring of goodwill towards them, wasn't there? So I do think there were very special circumstances which drove that 725,000 figure on 2022. The 2023 number will be quite a lot lower. It'll probably start with a 3. Now, it's true that the OBR increased the projection for immigration for 2023 a little bit, but it's still much, much lower than 2022. And I don't think the Chancellor's properly articulated that point. But look, it's still really high. It's still, when Blair came in 1997, net migration was 50,000.
Yeah.
And the year before the Brexit vote in 2016, it was about 350,000. And we're roughly around the 300 to 350,000 territory, which is still very, very high when public services are so stretched and the economy isn't growing.
I have to ask you about pensions. We were inundated with emails yesterday, Liam, from pensioners who feel taken for granted, overlooked, and you've been calling this time and time again the dreaded fiscal drag has pulled them into a taxation bracket, and we found out today staggering figures. £8 billion of hits to British pensioners, and they're not at all happy about it.
Well, I've been saying for many, many years that we should raise the personal allowance from 12.5 grand, where it's been frozen for a long time, to at at least £20,000, taking a lot of pensioners out of taxation altogether.
That's a Reform UK policy right there.
I think you'll find it was. I think you'll find it was the other way around, Chris. But no, it is. It is a policy that Reform have adopted. And in this instance, I'm not here for any political party, but I do think there's a lot in that. I do think you need to do something radical to take people out of tax. I think a lot of the people who earn between 12 and 20 grand anyway are getting benefits back. So it's so complicated. Just get them out of benefits. Also, get the state off their back.
Yeah.
You don't need all the civil servants, serving those people. So I would say this to pensioners, and Hunt made a mistake in his speech. He should have said, I'm doing national insurance instead of income tax. We know why he did national insurance instead of income tax, because it's cheaper. Because pensioners pay income tax, they don't pay national insurance. So if you lower national insurance, it costs the state less than if you lower income tax. The same with landlords, right? Landlords don't pay national insurance, they do pay income tax. That's why a national insurance reduction is cheaper for the state. But he should have said, I see and acknowledge that this national insurance drop won't benefit pensioners. But pensioners, I've just confirmed last week, which he did, that under a Conservative government, the triple lock will remain in place. The triple lock is that the basic state pension each year increases by the growth of earnings, inflation, 2.5%, or whichever is greater. And that means that last April, the basic state pension went up by around 10%, because that was inflation the September before, very high. And then this April, the basic state pension is going to go up by 8.5%, which is the increasing earnings last September, which is how we calibrate the system. So, look, I'm not saying to anyone who's a GB News viewer or listener or otherwise, that there isn't pensioner poverty in this country. There is pensioner poverty in this country. On the other hand, pensioners have had a pretty, chunky increase in the basic state pension. It hasn't always kept up with inflation, but, wages have been falling against inflation for many, many months as well. They're now recovering. The basic state pension is now recovering. But that was a mistake. Hunt should have said, I'm doing national insurance. These are the reasons. Pensioners will feel hard done by. But remember, we will stand by the triple lock. And Labour say the same thing as well. There's almost no chance that the triple lock is going to be removed in the next Parliament, because both main parties are on the hook.
OK, Liam Halligan, expert analysis. Beautiful as ever. Chris O, same from you, my friends. Great stuff. But do you buy that out there? Do you feel that that's the case? Or do you feel, as you certainly did yesterday, overlooked, taken for granted, and older people so much more likely to vote Conservative? Will it affect your decision?